Rich man forces 4-year-old daughter to clean stable with her bare hands, but this horse saw it and did something that shocked everyone. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on the farmyard when little Isabella, just 4 years old, was dragged by the arms to the stable. Her delicate little hands trembled as Theodore, Ted Caldwell, her 52-year-old father, pushed her inside the stuffy, foul-smelling place. "You spilled the milk on the floor for the 3rd time this week," he yelled, his face red with rage. "Now you're going to learn to be more careful. Clean all of this up with your bare hands, no cloths, no nothing." The little girl looked at the floor covered in manure and soiled straw, her dark eyes filling with tears that she tried to hold back. Ted crossed his arms, watching his daughter's every move with a hard, implacable expression. His angular features seemed carved in stone, and there wasn't a trace of compassion in his gaze. "Don't look at me like that," he snarled. "Your mother was too weak, and that's why she abandoned us. I'm not going to raise a weak daughter like her. You will be strong. You will learn to obey." Isabella lowered her head and began to pick up the manure with her bare hands. The sensitive skin of her palms soon began to burn, but she knew that any complaint would only worsen her situation. Ted had an explosive temper, and in recent months his punishments had become increasingly severe. On the other side of the stable's bars, an 8-year-old white horse watched the scene. His intelligent eyes showed a growing restlessness whenever he witnessed these situations. The animal, of noble bearing and immaculate coat, had a different behavior from the other horses on the property. He seemed to understand that something was wrong in those interactions between father and daughter. "Finish that up," Ted ordered, glancing at his watch. "You have 15 minutes. If you don't finish, you'll go without dinner again." The threat made Isabella's empty stomach clench. The previous night, she had been deprived of her meal for dropping a few grains of corn on the floor during lunch. Constant hunger was becoming her most faithful companion, along with the fear that grew in her chest with each passing day. As the girl continued her degrading task, the white horse approached the bars, stretching his neck as if to offer some kind of comfort. Ted noticed the gesture and frowned. "Get out of there, you useless animal," he said, hitting the fence hard. The horse moved away, but continued to watch the scene attentively. Isabella's hands began to show small cuts caused by rough pieces of wood mixed in with the manure. She bit her lower lip to keep from crying, remembering her father's cruel words about weakness. With each movement, she felt the wounds burning more, but she continued working in silence. Ted paced back and forth, constantly checking his watch. His impatience was palpable, and Isabella knew that any delay would be interpreted as disobedience. The man always found reasons to apply more severe punishments, as if he were looking for excuses to vent a rage that came from somewhere very deep. 10 minutes, he announced coldly. The girl quickened her movements, ignoring the pain in her hands and the nausea caused by the strong smell of the place. Her clothes, once clean, were now dirty and stained. The little blue dress that her mother had made for her, one of the few memories she kept of the woman who, according to Ted, had simply disappeared from their lives, was unrecognizable. The white horse remained close throughout the time, as if standing guard. His hooves beat on the ground rhythmically whenever Ted raised his voice, and his ears twitched nervously. It was as if the animal could feel the child's suffering and tried in some way to offer his presence as protection. When Isabella finally finished, her hands were raw and her face was pale with exhaustion. Ted inspected the work with critical eyes, looking for any fault that could justify additional punishment. "It's acceptable," he said finally. "Now go wash up and make lunch, and if you spill anything else today, you'll sleep in the stable tonight." The threat echoed in Isabella's ears as she staggered toward the house. Her legs trembled with weakness, and she needed to lean on the fence to avoid falling. The white horse followed her with his gaze until she disappeared from sight, and then emitted a low, melancholic whinny that seemed to carry all the sadness of the world. That afternoon, while Isabella prepared lunch with sore hands. She didn't know that, on the other side of the fence, on the neighboring property, a grey-haired lady had heard the shouts and was beginning to worry about what was happening on the Caldwell farm. 3 days after the episode in the stable, Isabella woke up with a high fever. Her frail little body trembled under the thin sheet, and the wounds on her hands had become infected, creating small, yellowish blisters that throbbed with pain. She tried to get up to make Ted's breakfast, as she did every morning, but her legs couldn't support her. "Dad," she called in a weak, hoarse voice, "I can't get up." Ted appeared in the bedroom doorway, already dressed for work on the farm. His face twisted into an expression of irritation when he saw his daughter still lying down. "What's this story? Get up right now." "Laziness isn't an illness," he said, approaching the bed with heavy steps. When he put his hand on the girl's forehead and felt the high temperature, his anger only increased. For him, any sign of weakness was unacceptable, and his daughter's illness represented another obstacle in his plans to make her as tough as he was. "You're faking it," he accused, pulling her roughly by the arm. "Get up and go do your chores. Sickness is for weak people." Isabella tried to obey, but as soon as she stood up, everything spun around her, and she fell to the floor, hitting her knee on the rough board. The impact drew a moan of pain from the girl, but Ted just crossed his arms, impassive. "How long are you going to lie there and dramatize?" he asked. "Your mother also pretended to be sick when she didn't want to do things. That's how she abandoned us, pretending she needed help." Those words about her mother always confused Isabella. She had some vague memories of a brown-haired woman who sang lullabies and made small, colorful dresses, but those images seemed so distant that sometimes she doubted if they were real or just dreams. "Please, Dad," she whispered, still on the floor. "I'm very cold." "Cold? In the middle of the summer heat?" Ted mocked. "You're going to learn to be strong the hard way. Get up and go take care of the animals. The work doesn't wait for anyone." Outside, the white horse paced nervously in the pasture, as if he sensed that something was wrong. When he saw Ted dragging Isabella out of the house, the animal approached the fence, watching attentively. His intelligent eyes seemed to register every detail of the situation. Isabella was forced to carry buckets of water to the other animals, even with her injured hands and the fever consuming her strength. With each step, she staggered, and the weight of the bucket seemed to increase exponentially. The morning sun, which would normally be welcome, now burned her feverish skin like embers. "Faster!" Ted shouted from the porch, sipping his morning whiskey. "Back in my day, 4-year-old children were already working from sunup to sundown without complaining." But the white horse followed Isabella's every move, and when she tripped and almost fell, he emitted a sharp whinny that caught even Ted's attention. The man looked at the animal suspiciously, noting how agitated he seemed whenever the girl was around. "That's a strange animal," he muttered. "Seems to have more feeling than people." On the neighboring property, 68-year-old Mrs. Eleanor Ellie Peterson was hanging clothes on the clothesline when she heard the shouts coming from the Caldwell farm. She had known Isabel's mother, Sarah, since they were young, and always wondered what had really happened for her to disappear so suddenly. "What's that noise?" she muttered, stopping to listen better. The shouts were constant, always Ted's rough voice echoing through the valley. Ellie remembered how Sarah used to visit her with little Isabella in her arms, talking about embroidery and candy recipes. The young woman always seemed worried, but never revealed details about her problems at home. Now the daily shouts made Ellie suspect that something was very wrong happening on that property. Meanwhile, Isabella continued her task, but her vision began to blur. Dehydration and fever were taking their toll, and she felt as if she were floating. In a moment of carelessness, she dropped one of the buckets, spilling water all over the ground. The noise alerted Ted, who came running with his face contorted in rage. "Again! Will you never learn?" he roared, grabbing the girl by the arm so hard that she cried out in pain. "Now you're going to carry water until lunchtime, without stopping." Isabella tried to explain that she was feeling sick, but the words came out garbled and confused due to the fever. Ted interpreted this as another attempt to escape punishment. "Stop stammering and go to work," he ordered, pushing her toward the well. The white horse, who had observed the whole scene, began to move agitatedly inside the pen. His hooves beat on the ground forcefully, and he shook his head repeatedly, as if he were trying to draw attention to something. It was completely atypical behavior for an animal usually calm and docile. Ted noticed the horse's agitation and frowned. The animal had been left by Sarah when she abandoned the family, and he was always bothered by the presence of the creature, which seemed to carry memories of times he preferred to forget. "What's that noise?" he yelled at the horse. "Be quiet there, you useless animal." But the horse continued agitated, and when Isabella stumbled again, almost falling face down on the ground, the animal moved even closer to the fence, as if he wanted to jump and run in her direction. As the morning progressed, Isabella's condition visibly worsened. Her cheeks were red with fever, but the rest of her face was pale as paper. The infected hands left small bloodstains on the bucket she carried, and she began to stammer even more when trying to respond to her father's orders. Ellie, worried about the shouts that didn't stop, decided to approach the fence that divided the two properties. From afar, she could see little Isabella staggering with buckets that seemed too heavy for her strength. "Good heavens," she whispered, covering her mouth with her hands. "What kind of man treats a child like that?" At that moment, something inside her decided. Ellie knew she needed to find out more about what was happening to her old friend's daughter, even if it meant confronting the fearsome Ted Caldwell. 2 weeks after the fever episode, Isabella had lost even more weight, and her clothes were starting to hang loose on her thin body. Ted, in turn, was increasingly irritated and impatient, especially after receiving some unwanted visits from men with serious faces and threatening voices. On the morning of a stifling Tuesday, he decided it was time for exemplary punishment. Isabella had committed the crime of dropping some corn kernels while feeding the chickens, and that was enough to awaken her father's fury. "You're a complete waste," he yelled, grabbing the girl by the wrist. "Food costs money, and money doesn't grow on trees. You're going to learn to value every grain." He dragged her to a corner of the yard where there was a pile of heavy stones, some the size of clenched fists. The sun was particularly strong that day, and the heat rose from the ground in visible waves. "You're going to carry these stones one by one to the other side of the yard," Ted ordered. "And you're going to do it until I tell you to stop. Every stone you drop, you'll have to start all over again." Isabella looked at the pile of stones and then at the distance she needed to travel. Her little hands still ached from the poorly healed wounds, and she knew that weight would be almost impossible to bear. But she also knew that questioning her father would only make things worse. "Please, Dad," she tried in a trembling voice. "The stones are too heavy for me." "Your mother also thought things were too heavy," he replied bitterly. "That's why she left us. She couldn't handle real life just like you." While Isabella began her Herculean task, the white horse watched everything from his pen. The animal seemed increasingly agitated by the mistreatment, and on that specific day, his restlessness reached a new level. He paced back and forth, snorting and shaking his head constantly. The first stone that Isabella tried to carry was so heavy that she could barely lift it off the ground. When she finally did, her arms trembled so much that she dropped it before even taking 3 steps. The sound of the stone hitting the ground echoed through the yard like a gunshot. "Start over," Ted ordered coldly, "and this time, don't drop it." Tears began to stream down Isabella's face, but she returned to the pile and tried again. The sun beat down on her back, and sweat mixed with tears blurred her vision. The second attempt also failed, and the third, and the fourth. It was then that the white horse did something he had never done before. He approached the planks of the fence and began to strike the wood with his hooves, producing a rhythmic and loud sound that echoed throughout the property. The noise was so intense that even the chickens stopped pecking to pay attention. "What the heck is going on with that animal?" Ted grumbled, walking toward the pen. "Be quiet there, you stupid beast." But the horse didn't stop. On the contrary, he intensified his movements as if he were trying to communicate or draw attention to something. His eyes were fixed on Isabella, who had fallen to her knees on the ground, too exhausted to continue carrying the stones. "Get up!" Ted yelled at his daughter. "You're not stopping until you finish what Duke began." At that moment, a woman's voice echoed from the farm gate. "Ted Caldwell, I need to speak with you." It was Ellie, who had finally decided to personally investigate what was going on. She held a small basket of eggs in her hand, using it as an excuse for the visit. Ted turned around, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "What do you want?" he asked sharply. "I brought some eggs as a gift," Ellie said, but her eyes were fixed on Isabella, who remained kneeling on the ground, surrounded by stones. "My goodness, that's heavy work for such a little girl." "I'm raising my daughter," Ted replied, placing himself between Ellie and Isabella. "Children need to learn responsibility early." Ellie noticed Isabella's injured hands, her extreme thinness, and the way she trembled. The older woman felt her heart ache, remembering how cheerful and healthy the girl used to be when she came with her mother to visit. "Where's Sarah?" she asked directly. "I haven't seen your wife in a while." Ted's face closed up even more, and he took a threatening step toward his neighbor. "My wife abandoned us," he said through clenched teeth. "Ran away like a coward, leaving her daughter behind. So now I'm taking care of the girl's upbringing my way." But something in the way he spoke didn't convince Ellie. She had known Sarah for years and knew that that woman would never abandon her daughter voluntarily. There was something wrong with that story, and Isabella's weakened appearance only confirmed her suspicions. "That's a shame," she said, pretending to accept Ted's version. "Sarah was always a good mother. I'm sure she had her reasons." "Reasons?" Ted exploded. "What reasons could a woman have to abandon her own daughter? She was weak, that's all." Throughout this conversation, the white horse continued to make noise, as if trying to draw attention to himself. Ellie noticed the animal's strange behavior and remembered something important. "Didn't that horse belong to Sarah?" she asked. "I remember she always spoke of him fondly." Ted seemed uncomfortable with the question. "The animal stayed here when she left," he said evasively. "Just another responsibility she left behind." At that moment, Ellie realized a connection she hadn't noticed before. The horse seemed especially protective of Isabella, and now she understood why. The animal was a direct link to the girl's mother, and his protective instincts were reacting to the mistreatment he witnessed. "Well, I need to go," she said, handing over the basket of eggs. "But if you need anything, just call. Neighbors should help each other." As she walked back to her property, Ellie looked back and saw Ted forcing Isabella to return to work with the stones. The white horse had stopped making noise but remained attentive, watching every move. That night, Ellie couldn't sleep. The images of the girl suffering wouldn't leave her head, and she began to formulate a plan to uncover the truth about Sarah's disappearance. There was something very wrong with that story, and she was determined to get to the bottom of it. Meanwhile, on the neighboring farm, Isabella was finally allowed to stop after carrying half of the stones. Her hands were bleeding again, and she could barely stand. When she passed by the white horse's pen, the animal approached the fence and lowered his head, as if wanting to console her. For a brief moment, Isabella rested her forehead on the horse's head, and both remained like that, sharing a moment of silent understanding. It was as if the animal knew exactly what she was going through and wanted to offer the only comfort he could give, his protective presence. 3 weeks after Ellie's visit, the situation on Ted's farm had deteriorated even further. The girl now showed obvious signs of severe malnutrition, with deep dark circles under her eyes and protruding bones visible through her pale skin. Her hair, once bright and silky, was dull and brittle, the result of the constant food deprivations that Ted imposed as punishment. On that Thursday morning, Isabella woke up feeling intense dizziness. When she tried to get out of bed, her legs buckled, and she fell to the floor with a dull thud. The noise alerted Ted, who came running thinking she was up to some mischief. "What was that noise?" he asked, finding his daughter lying on the bedroom floor. "Get up from there right now." "I can't, Dad," Isabella whispered, trying to lean against the wall. "Everything is spinning." Ted pulled her roughly by the arm, forcing her to stand up. When he saw that she was really staggering, his irritation only increased. For him, any sign of weakness was unacceptable and deserved even more severe punishment. "You're faking again," he accused. "Just like your mother used to do when she wanted to run away from her responsibilities. Well, that act doesn't work with me." He dragged her out of the house, ignoring the low moans of pain she emitted. The destination this time was the chicken coop, where the birds scratched nervously, as if sensing the tension in the air. "You're going to clean the entire chicken coop with your bare hands," Ted ordered, "and then you're going to carry 50-pound bags of feed from the storage room here. Let's see if that laziness goes away." Isabella looked at the bags of feed he pointed to. Each of them weighed more than 4 times her own body weight, which had decreased dramatically in recent weeks. It was physically impossible for her to carry something like that, but she knew that questioning her father would only result in even worse punishments. "Please, Dad," she tried once again. "The bags are too heavy. I can clean the chicken coop, but I can't carry the bags." Ted's response was a slap in the girl's face, the first direct physical blow he had dealt her. The sound echoed through the yard like a crack of a whip, and Isabella brought her hand to her red cheek, her eyes filling with tears of pain and shock. "Don't contradict me," he shouted. "Your mother also made excuses, and look what happened. She left me with all the responsibilities and ran away when things got tough. I'm not going to raise a cowardly daughter like her." From his pen, the white horse witnessed the entire scene. When he saw Ted hit the girl, something changed completely in his behavior. The animal, who until then had only remained agitated but at a distance, now approached the fence with a completely different posture. His ears were back, a sign of aggression, and he began to strike the ground with his hooves forcefully, producing a threatening sound. "What's wrong now, you damned animal?" Ted shouted at the horse. "Be quiet there before I decide to get rid of you too." But the horse was not intimidated. On the contrary, he positioned himself so that he could directly observe Isabella as if he were standing guard. His eyes, normally calm and docile, now shone with a protective intensity that Ted had never seen before. Meanwhile, Isabella began to clean the chicken coop with slow, painful movements. Each time she bent down, she felt the world spinning around her, but she continued working for fear of being hit again. The chickens moved away from her, as if sensing that something was wrong. After an hour of work, Ted returned to check on the progress and demand that she start carrying the bags of feed. When Isabella tried to lift the first bag, she simply couldn't. The weight was absurd for her weakened body, and she fell backward, pulled down by the weight of the feed. "Get up," Ted ordered coldly. "You're not leaving there until you carry all the bags." It was at this moment that something extraordinary happened. The white horse, seeing the girl's despair, did something that none of the other animals on the farm had done before. He jumped over the low fence of his pen, demonstrating impressive agility for an animal of his size. Ted was paralyzed for a few seconds, not believing what he was seeing. The horse had freed himself and was now walking directly toward where Isabella was lying on the ground, still trying to get up from under the bag of feed. "Get out of there, you crazy animal!" Ted shouted, picking up a piece of wood to try to scare the horse away. But the animal positioned himself between Ted and Isabella, lowering his head in a clearly threatening posture. It was as if he were saying that he would no longer allow mistreatment of the girl. His muscles were tense, and he snorted loudly, demonstrating that he was willing to defend the child. "Get out of my way," Ted bellowed, brandishing the piece of wood. "This girl is my daughter, and I'll raise her however I want." The horse didn't move. On the contrary, he took a few steps toward Ted, who recoiled instinctively. It was the first time that someone or something had come between him and his cruel punishments. In that tense moment, a familiar voice echoed from the farm gate. "Ted, is everything all right there?" It was Ellie again, but this time she wasn't alone. At her side walked a younger man whom Ted recognized as John, one of the rural workers in the area who occasionally provided services for various farms. "We heard some strange noises coming from here," John said, observing the unusual scene. the horse positioned defensively, Ted with a piece of wood in his hand, and Isabella lying on the ground under a bag of feed that was clearly too heavy for her. Ted immediately realized how compromising the situation looked. He dropped the piece of wood and tried to assume a more normal posture, but the horse remained in a guard position. "It's just a little problem with the horse," he said, forcing a fake smile. "The animal got agitated for some reason." Ellie observed Isabella on the ground and was horrified by the girl's appearance. In just a few weeks since her last visit, the child had lost even more weight and now looked almost skeletal. "Good heavens, Ted," she said, approaching. "Is the girl all right? She looks very thin." "She's going through a difficult phase," he replied evasively. "Children sometimes get sick and don't want to eat right." But John, who had experience with children from being the father of 3, immediately recognized the signs of severe malnutrition. Isabella's skeletal arms, her sunken cheeks, and the way she trembled were not the result of childhood sickness. "This girl needs medical attention," John said directly. "She's clearly malnourished." Ted felt the anger boiling inside him, but he knew he couldn't explode in front of the witnesses. The white horse remained in a defensive position, as if he knew his presence was necessary to protect Isabella. "I appreciate the concern," Ted said through clenched teeth, "but I know how to take care of my own daughter." Ellie and John exchanged meaningful glances. Both knew that there was something very wrong happening there, and the horse's protective reaction only confirmed their suspicions that Isabella was suffering severe mistreatment. After Ellie and John's embarrassing departure, Ted entered a state of fury that Isabella had never witnessed before. He walked through the house like a caged animal, breaking dishes and kicking furniture, while muttering incomprehensible words between his teeth. "Nosy neighbors," he muttered. "People who don't know their own lives want to comment on my house." The white horse had been forced back into his pen, but Ted had to use a rope and a lot of effort to get him back. The animal resisted until the last moment, reluctant to leave Isabella alone with the enraged father. That night, when it got completely dark, Ted made a decision he had been postponing for weeks. He went to the room where Isabella was lying, shivering with cold and hunger, and woke her up abruptly. "Get up," he ordered. "We need to talk." Isabella sat up in bed, frightened by the sinister tone in her father's voice. He pulled up an old chair and sat in front of her, his eyes shining with a cruelty that she had never seen before. "You want to know the truth about your mother?" he asked with a malicious smile. "Since you're getting older, I think you have the right to know what really happened." Isabella nodded timidly, always curious about the whereabouts of the woman who appeared vaguely in her oldest memories. "Your mother didn't abandon us," Ted said slowly, savoring each word. "I kicked her out of this house. You know why?" The girl shook her head, her eyes wide with surprise and fear. "Because she wanted to report me," he continued. "She said I was being too hard on you, that the neighbors would get suspicious. She was weak, cried every time I tried to teach you discipline." The words fell on Isabella like stones. All her life she had believed that her mother had abandoned her, but now she discovered that Sarah had tried to protect her and had been expelled for it. "She tried to take you with her," Ted said cruelly. "But I didn't let her. You're my daughter, and I decide how to raise you." She left here crying like a child and never came back. Tears began to stream down Isabella's face, but this time they weren't tears of physical pain. It was a much deeper suffering, the discovery that her mother had fought for her and lost. "Did she love me?" the girl asked in a broken voice. "Love doesn't put food on the table," Ted replied coldly. "Love doesn't teach discipline. I do what she never had the courage to do. I turn you into a strong person." But Ted's revelations didn't stop there. He was clearly disturbed by the visit from the neighbors and decided to vent all his frustration on his daughter. "And you know what?" he continued, getting up from the chair. "That damned horse is going too. He belonged to your mother, and he keeps reminding me of her every time I look at the animal." Isabella's heart raced. The white horse was her only source of comfort in that place of horror, the only creature that showed any kind of affection for her. "No, Dad, please," she pleaded. "The horse didn't do anything wrong." "Yes, he did," Ted shouted. "He sided with you against me today." An animal that doesn't respect the owner is good for nothing. In that same night, as Isabella cried silently in her room, Ted went to the old phone he had in the living room and dialed a number he knew by heart. On the other end of the line, a gruff voice answered. "Hello, Mr. Miller, it's Ted here. I have a horse to sell. No, I can't wait until the end of the month. I need the money tomorrow." The conversation continued for a few minutes, with Ted negotiating the sale of the white horse for a price well below market value. He was desperate for quick cash, and the animal represented one of the few valuable things he still owned. When he finished the call, he went to the window and looked towards the stable. Even in the dark, he could see the silhouette of the white horse, who seemed restless, as if sensing that something bad was about to happen. "Tomorrow, you're out of here," Ted muttered to himself, "and without that animal to defend her, the girl will finally learn who's boss in this house." The next morning, Isabella woke up to the sound of a truck arriving at the property. When she looked out the window, she saw a fat and poorly dressed man getting out of the cab, accompanied by two helpers carrying ropes and equipment to transport animals. Mr. Miller, an animal dealer known in the area for not asking too many questions about the origin of the animals he bought, greeted Ted with a firm handshake. "Where's the animal?" he asked, looking around. "There in the pen," Ted replied, pointing to where the white horse grazed peacefully, still unaware of the fate that awaited him. Isabella ran out of the house barefoot and in her nightgown, desperate to prevent them from taking her only friend. "Dad, don't do this," she cried, throwing herself at Ted's feet. "Please don't sell the horse. I promise I'll be obedient. I'll do everything you say." Ted pushed her hard, causing her to fall to the ground. "Too late," he said. "The deal is already done." Mr. Miller's men approached the pen with lassos, but the white horse immediately sensed the danger. He began to move nervously, snorting and stamping his hooves on the ground. When they saw the ropes, their escape instincts were fully activated. "This critter is agitated," commented one of the helpers. "It's going to be a pain to load." Isabella watched the scene in horror, seeing the men trying to lasso the horse, who was struggling desperately. The animal looked in her direction, as if wanting to say goodbye, but at the same time trying to resist capture. "Hold him right!" shouted Mr. Miller. "I don't want him getting hurt during transport." After several minutes of struggle, the men managed to immobilize the horse and began to lead him toward the truck. With each step that the animal took away from her, Isabella felt as if a part of her soul was being torn away. "Star!" she cried, using the affectionate name she had given the animal. "Star, come back!" The white horse turned his head towards the girl and emitted a long, melancholic whinny, as if trying to say goodbye. It was a sound full of sadness and despair that echoed throughout the valley. When the truck finally left, taking the horse away, Isabella collapsed on the ground and began to cry convulsively. It was as if she had lost the last thread of hope that kept her standing in that hell. Ted counted the money he had received and smiled with satisfaction. It was a small amount, but enough to temporarily appease the creditors who had appeared the previous week making threats. "Now, yes," he said, looking at his daughter prostrate on the ground. "Without that animal to protect you, you will finally learn to respect me as you should." But what Ted didn't know was that Ellie had witnessed the entire scene from her neighboring property and was now absolutely certain that she needed to act quickly to save Isabella. The sale of the horse had been the last straw that was needed for her to make a drastic decision. 3 days after the sale of the horse, Ellie could no longer bear what she was witnessing. On that Saturday morning, she made a decision that would change the course of the entire story. She went to her kitchen, picked up the old phone, and dialed a number she had obtained through the town's pastor. "Sarah, it's Ellie, Ted's neighbor," she said, when the familiar voice answered on the other end of the line. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Ellie heard muffled sobs coming from the phone. "Ellie, how is my daughter?" Sarah asked in a choked voice. "It's been 8 months since I last saw her. Ted kicked me out of the house and said that if I tried to return, he would do something terrible to Isabella." "Sarah, dear, your daughter is suffering greatly," Ellie said gently. "Ted is mistreating the girl terribly. She is malnourished, injured, and yesterday he sold your white horse just to torture her more." And the sobs on the other end of the line intensified. "Oh my God, Star." "He sold Star?" Sarah asked. "That horse was the last gift my father gave me before he died, and he protected Isabella so much." "Sarah, you need to come back urgently," Ellie insisted. "The girl won't last much longer. She is withering away." "I've been trying to get legal help," Sarah explained. "I got a job at a seamstress's shop here in the neighboring town and saved some money. I even got a lawyer who agreed to help me, but Ted has influence in the area and—" "It doesn't matter," Ellie interrupted. "Come now, I'll help you. I have some photographs I took secretly showing the girl's condition, and John is also willing to testify." Meanwhile, on the farm, Ted was receiving an unexpected visit. Two intimidating-looking men had arrived in a black car and were sitting at the kitchen table, smoking cigarettes and speaking in low, threatening tones. "Ted, our patience is running out," said the older of them, a bald man with scars on his face. "It's been 2 months since the deadline we agreed on." "I paid part of it last week," Ted tried to argue, sweating cold. "I sold a horse and—" "A pittance," interrupted the second man. "You owe us $50,000, Ted. Money you lost in bets and then tried to recover by borrowing from us." Isabella was hiding behind the living room door, listening to the conversation and trembling with fear. She had never seen men as scary as those two. "Listen carefully," continued the bald man. "You have until Monday to get the full amount of money. If you don't, we'll take this farm and everything in it as payment. And that includes anything that might be worth something," added the other, looking directly in the direction where Isabella was hiding. Ted understood the implicit threat and felt the blood run cold in his veins. These men were capable of anything to recover the money, and he knew there was no way to get the amount in such a short time. After the creditors left, Ted went into total panic. He ran through the house looking for anything of value that he could sell, but he had already gotten rid of almost everything in recent months. The farm was mortgaged, the animals sold, and he had nothing left. "Isabella!" he shouted. "Come here." The girl appeared timidly, even thinner and paler after the last few days, without the comfort of the white horse. "You're going to have to come to town with me," he said, grabbing her by the arm. "We have to solve some problems." But before they could leave, the sound of cars arriving caught Ted's attention. Through the window, he saw a modest car stop in front of the gate, and from it descended a brown-haired woman whom he recognized immediately. "Sarah," he muttered, feeling the anger boil. "How dare she come back here?" Along with Sarah came Ellie, John, and a man in a suit whom Ted presumed to be a lawyer. They walked determinedly towards the house, and Sarah was trembling visibly with nervousness and anxiety. When Isabella saw her mother through the window, she couldn't believe it. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming or delirious from hunger. But as Sarah approached closer and she could clearly see the beloved face, the girl began to cry. "Mom!" she whispered, running towards the door. Ted intercepted her brutally, holding her by the shoulders. "You're not going anywhere," he said through clenched teeth. "That woman has no right to be here." But Sarah had already reached the door and was knocking urgently. "Ted, open this door!" she shouted. "I've come to get my daughter." "Your daughter?" Ted laughed bitterly. "You abandoned this girl 8 months ago. You have no more rights over her." "I didn't abandon anyone," Sarah replied. "You kicked me out when I tried to protect her from your mistreatment." The lawyer stepped forward and spoke in a firm voice. "Mr. Caldwell, I have here documents that prove neglect and mistreatment. We have photographs, witnesses, and a medical report stating severe malnutrition of the child." Ted realized that he was cornered. From both sides, the threatening creditors, and now the ex-wife with legal support, his options were running out quickly. "You can't prove anything," he tried to bluff. It was then that John spoke up. "Yes, I can. I saw you forcing a 4-year-old child to carry 50-pound bags of feed. That's mistreatment, and any judge will agree." In that dramatic moment, the sound of a truck approaching caught everyone's attention. It was Mr. Miller returning, but this time he wasn't alone. Along with him came the white horse, who had systematically refused to eat or obey since he was sold. "Ted!" shouted Mr. Miller, getting out of the truck, visibly irritated. "I want my money back. This horse is good for nothing. He doesn't eat, he doesn't work, he just keeps whinnying and trying to escape." When Isabella saw the white horse getting out of the truck, she finally managed to break free from her father and ran towards the animal. The horse, as soon as he saw her, emitted a joyful whinny and trotted towards her, completely ignoring the ropes that still held him. "Star!" shouted Sarah, recognizing the horse that had been her companion for so many years. The scene that followed was one of pure emotion. Isabella hugged the horse's neck, and the animal lowered his head to touch the girl, as if consoling her after days of separation. Sarah approached slowly, and when Isabella saw her up close, her memories began to return. "Mom, is it really you?" the girl asked, still distrustful due to the traumas. Sarah knelt down to her daughter's height and began to sing softly a lullaby they used to share. Gradually, Isabella's face lit up with recognition, and she threw herself into her mother's arms. Ted, seeing his last source of control escaping, tried one last desperate gambit. But at that moment, the creditor's black car returned, and the two men got out with even darker expressions. "Ted, what convention is this?" asked the bald man, observing the assembled crowd. "Family problems," he replied nervously. "Well, your family problems will have to wait," said the second man. "We've decided not to wait until Monday. We want our money now, or we're taking everything you have." It was then that the lawyer stepped forward and announced something that no one expected. "Gentlemen, this property is being confiscated by the court due to proven child abuse. Any financial transaction is suspended until the conclusion of the process." The creditors were furious, but they knew they couldn't fight against a court decision. Ted, realizing that he had lost everything, his daughter, his wife, the farm, and now faced criminal charges, collapsed into a chair and began to cry. 3 months later, Isabella was living with Sarah in a small rented house in town. The girl attended therapy sessions twice a week and was slowly regaining weight and confidence. The horse star lived on a nearby farm where Isabella could visit him every day after school. Ted had lost the farm, faced charges of mistreatment, and been forced to leave the region after being rejected by the entire community. The creditors never managed to recover the money, and he left with nothing but the clothes on his back. On a sunny afternoon, Isabella was brushing Star's mane when Sarah approached with an envelope in her hands. "What's this, Mum?" the girl asked. "These are the final adoption papers," Sarah said, smiling, "and also the documents that prove that Star is officially ours again." Isabella hugged her mother and then the horse, feeling for the first time in a long time that she was truly safe. The suffering had come to an end, and a new life full of hope was just beginning.